Billionaire's son mocks black waitress in German. Her fluent response stuns him. What if one careless moment could change everything you thought you knew about yourself? Grace Holloway stood behind the polished counter of Riverside Bistro on a quiet Thursday evening, her hands steady as she poured water into crystal glasses. She'd worked there for 3 years, saving every penny for her daughter's college fund. At 58, Grace had learned to let certain things roll off her back. The dismissive glances, the occasional rudeness that came with serving tables in an upscale restaurant. But tonight would be different. Tonight, a young man in an expensive suit would walk through those doors with his friends, speaking words he never imagined she'd understand. Words that would crack open something raw and real between two strangers. Sometimes the universe has a way of teaching us lessons when we least expect them, in languages we thought were private. Where are you watching from tonight? Grace had always loved languages. Growing up in a military family, she'd lived in Germany for 6 years during her childhood, attending local schools and soaking up German like it was second nature. Her father had been stationed in Heidelberg, and young Grace had made friends easily, her quick ear picking up every nuance of the language. Those years felt like a lifetime ago now. Tucked away in memory like old photographs, she rarely mentioned her time in Germany anymore. Why would she? Most people saw her uniform and name tag and made their assumptions. That was fine. Grace had learned long ago that she didn't need to prove anything to anyone. If the evening shift had been steady but manageable, Grace moved through the dining room with practiced grace, checking on her tables, refilling drinks, making sure everyone had what they needed. She'd raised her daughter, Maya, mostly on her own, after her husband passed away 12 years ago. Maya was 23 now, working toward her master's degree in engineering, and Grace's heart swelled with pride every time she thought about it. Every double shift, every aching foot, every smile she gave when she didn't feel like smiling. It had all been for Maya. Around 8 o'clock, the front door opened and 3 young men walked in, all sharp suits and expensive watches. Grace noticed them immediately, not because of their clothes, but because of the way they carried themselves, like they owned the space before they'd even sat down. The hostess, a sweet college student named Bethany, led them to a corner table in Grace's section. Grace straightened her apron and walked over with menus, her professional smile firmly in place. "Good evening, gentlemen. Can I start you off with something to drink?" Her voice was warm, friendly. The young man in the middle, blonde hair slicked back, barely glanced at her. "Water. Just water for now," he said dismissively, already turning back to his friends. The other two murmured their agreement. Grace nodded and headed to get their drinks, catching a fragment of their conversation as she walked away. They were speaking German. Her steps didn't falter, but something tightened in her chest. She'd heard that language in her dreams sometimes, remnants of childhood memories. When she returned with their waters, she set them down carefully. "Are you ready to order, or would you like a few more minutes?" The blond young man, she'd glimpsed his credit card later and learned his name was Preston, waved her off. "Few minutes." He didn't say thank you. Grace walked away, tending to her other tables, but she couldn't help overhearing their conversation. They weren't being quiet. Preston was speaking German to his friends, and even from several feet away, Grace caught enough words to understand they were talking about a business deal, something about his father's company. She brought them bread, refilled waters, took their orders. Preston wanted the steak, medium rare, the most expensive item on the menu. Throughout it all, the 3 young men continued their conversation in German, comfortable in their assumption that no one around them could understand. Grace's expression remained pleasant and professional, but inside, something old and almost forgotten was stirring. A memory of being that little girl in Heidelberg, fluent and fearless. She wondered if they'd be surprised to know she understood every single word they were saying. But the night was young, and sometimes patience revealed more than confrontation ever could. Grace delivered their entrees with the same steady professionalism she'd maintained all evening. Preston's steak looked perfect, seared just right. As she set his plate down, he switched to German again, speaking to the dark-haired friend on his left. Diese Bedienung ist so langsam. Typisch. Wahrscheinlich hat sie nicht einmal die Schule abgeschlossen. This waitress is so slow. Typical. She probably didn't even finish school. His friends laughed. But Grace's hand didn't shake as she placed the last plate. She smiled. Enjoy your meal, gentlemen. Let me know if you need anything else. She walked away, her heart pounding beneath her calm exterior. Not from anger, she'd heard worse in her years of service work, but from something deeper, a kind of sadness. Here was this young man, blessed with wealth and education, using his privilege to mock someone he'd decided wasn't worth basic respect. She thought about her own Maya, who'd faced her share of dismissive comments and low expectations, who'd proven every doubter wrong with her brilliant mind and tireless work ethic. Grace had taught her daughter that dignity wasn't given, it was carried inside yourself, regardless of how others treated you. But tonight, something felt different. Maybe it was the German, bringing back memories of a time when she'd been young and the world had seemed kinder. Maybe it was the exhaustion of years of swallowing small cruelties. Maybe it was simply time. Grace continued her rounds, checking on an elderly couple celebrating their anniversary, making sure a family with 2 young children had extra napkins. She loved these moments, the real connections, the grateful smiles, the way people relaxed when they felt genuinely cared for. This job wasn't just about serving food. It was about creating small pockets of comfort in people's days. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. When she returned to Preston's table to check on their meals, he was in the middle of another German sentence. Sie versteht sowieso nichts. Diese Leute sind alle gleich. She doesn't understand anything anyway, and these people are all the same. His friend shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. Preston took a sip of his wine, clearly pleased with himself. Grace stood there for a moment, water pitcher in hand. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. Hold your head high, Gracie. Nobody can make you small unless you let them. She'd passed that wisdom to Maya. She'd lived it every day of her adult life. And suddenly, Grace realized she was tired of being invisible to people like Preston. Not angry, just tired. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was time to remind this young man that assumptions could be dangerous things. She cleared her throat softly. Preston looked up, irritation flickering across his handsome face. Was? He said in German. What? Grace smiled, and when she spoke, her German was flawless, carrying the slight Heidelberg accent of her childhood. Ich verstehe jedes Wort, das Sie gesagt haben. I understand every word you've said. The color drained from Preston's face. The table fell into stunned silence. Preston's mouth opened slightly, then closed again. His 2 friends exchanged horrified glances. Grace maintained her composure, her voice quiet but clear, as she continued in German. I lived in Heidelberg for 6 years as a child. Beautiful city. My father was stationed there with the military. I attended German schools, made wonderful friends, learned to speak the language like a native. She paused, switching back to English. So yes, I understood everything you said about me tonight. Preston's face had gone from pale to flushed red. I didn't... He stumbled over his words. Something Grace suspected didn't happen to him often. For the first time that evening, he actually looked at her, really looked at her, and seemed to see a person rather than just a uniform. I'm not angry, Grace said gently, and she meant it. The sadness she felt wasn't sharp. It was the kind that came from understanding rather than rage. But I want you to know something. I have a daughter who's getting her master's in engineering. I've worked 3 jobs to help her get through school. I speak 3 languages, German, Spanish, and English. And I've probably lived through more challenges than you can imagine. She paused. I'm not telling you this to make you feel bad. I'm telling you because people aren't always what you assume they are. One of Preston's friends, the one who'd looked uncomfortable earlier, spoke up quietly. Ma'am, I'm so sorry. That was completely out of line. His sincerity was evident, and Grace felt her heart soften slightly. But Preston surprised her more. His expensive bravado had crumbled, and in its place was something more human. You're right, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I was completely wrong. That was, God, that was awful of me. He ran his hand through his hair, genuine shame written across his young face. I don't have an excuse. My father always tells me I coast on his money and never think about other people. Tonight I proved him right. Grace studied him for a long moment. She thought about her own mistakes, the times she'd judged too quickly, the lessons life had taught her through humility and hardship. Have you ever faced something like this? A moment where you realized you'd misjudged someone or been misjudged yourself? Let us know in the comments. We all have moments we're not proud of, she said finally. The question is what we do after them. She refilled his water glass, a simple gesture of grace extended. Your father sounds like a wise man, maybe worth listening to. Preston nodded slowly, something shifting behind his eyes. His friend pulled out his wallet, but Preston stopped him. No, he said firmly. He looked up at Grace again. I'd like to speak to your manager, please. Grace's stomach dropped. After all that, was he really going to try to get her fired? She'd violated the cardinal rule of service. Never confront a customer, no matter what they said. Her job, Maya's tuition money. It could all disappear with one complaint. But she kept her voice steady. Of course, I'll get him right away. Grace's hands trembled slightly as she walked toward the manager's office. Tom Patterson had run Riverside Bistro for 15 years, and he was fair, but he also knew that wealthy customers kept the restaurant afloat. She knocked on his door, her mind racing through worst-case scenarios. Maya's next tuition payment was due in 3 weeks. Come in, Tom called. Grace stepped inside, and Tom looked up from his paperwork with his usual warm smile. Grace, everything okay? Table 12 would like to speak with you, she said, keeping her voice professional. There was an incident. Tom's expression shifted to concern. He stood immediately. Let me handle this. You okay? The kindness in his question nearly broke her composure, but Grace just nodded. Tom squeezed her shoulder briefly as he passed, a fatherly gesture he'd given her many times over the years, and headed toward Preston's table. Grace stayed back, her heart pounding. She busied herself with other tables, but her eyes kept drifting to where Tom stood, speaking with Preston. The conversation seemed intense, but not angry. Tom was nodding, listening carefully. Then Preston gestured toward her, and Grace felt her stomach clench. This was it. But when Tom walked back to her, his expression was strange, not angry, not concerned, but something close to amazed. Grace, come with me for a minute. They walked to the small break room, and Tom closed the door. That young man just told me what happened tonight. How he insulted you in German, thinking you wouldn't understand. How you responded with grace and dignity. Tom shook his head. He was nearly in tears, Grace. Said he wanted me to know that you were the most professional person he'd ever met, and that he was the one who'd behaved terribly. Grace blinked, processing this. He's not complaining about me? Complaining. Grace, he left a $2,000 tip and asked if he could cover your daughter's next tuition payment. Tom's eyes were misty. He said his father owns Preston Technologies, and he wants to make amends. Really make amends. The words didn't quite register at first. Grace had expected consequences, perhaps even the loss of her job. Instead, she was being offered something that felt too big, too overwhelming. I can't accept that, she said automatically. That's too much. I just wanted him to understand. He does understand, Tom interrupted gently. Maybe for the first time in his privileged life, he really understands. And Grace, he's not offering charity. He called it an education investment, and said Maya could intern at his father's company if she's interested. It's networking, mentorship. The money's almost secondary. If you've been enjoying this story and want to hear more heartwarming tales like this one, please subscribe to our channel. Grace sank into a chair, overwhelmed. In one evening, a moment of standing up for herself, not with anger, but with honest truth, had somehow transformed into this unexpected blessing. "Can I think about it?" she asked quietly. Tom smiled. "Of course. But Grace, don't think too long. Some gifts come exactly when we need them, even if we're too proud to admit we need them." "That young man is waiting to talk to you again." Grace walked back to table 12 with steady steps, though her heart still raced. Preston stood when he saw her approaching, a gesture of respect she hadn't expected. His friends had already left, and he stood alone, looking younger somehow, more vulnerable than the arrogant man who'd walked in hours earlier. "Mrs. Holloway," he began, and she noticed he'd learned her name. "I spoke with your manager, but I wanted to apologize to you directly. What I said tonight was inexcusable. I was showing off, being cruel for absolutely no reason except my own insecurity. You didn't deserve that." Grace saw something genuine in his expression, real remorse, the kind that came from actual self-reflection. "I accept your apology," she said quietly, "and I appreciate the generous offer. But, please," Preston interrupted gently. "I know it seems like too much, but my father built his company from nothing. He grew up poor, worked his way through college, and he spent my whole life trying to teach me the value of hard work and respect. I've been a terrible student." He gave a self-deprecating smile. "Let me do this. Not as charity, but as the start of learning to be better. Your daughter sounds incredible, and she deserves every opportunity. If Preston Technologies can help with that, it would actually mean more to me than you know." Grace thought about Maya, about the long nights when her daughter had cried over textbooks, worried about money, pushing herself beyond exhaustion to prove she belonged in her program. She thought about her own pride and how sometimes accepting help wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. On one condition," Grace said finally. "You meet Maya. You talk to her about the internship yourself. Hear about her work, her dreams. This isn't about me. It's about recognizing her merit." Preston's face broke into a genuine smile. "I'd be honored. And Mrs. Holloway, thank you. For tonight. For the lesson. For not giving up on me completely." He held out his hand, and after a moment, Grace shook it. Over the following weeks, Preston became a regular at Riverside Bistro, always in Grace's section, always respectful and kind. He met Maya, and true to his word, arranged an internship that turned into a job offer. But more than that, he changed. His father noticed. Tom noticed. Grace noticed. Sometimes one honest moment, one refusal to stay silent, could ripple outward in ways you never imagined. On Grace's last day at Riverside Bistro, she decided to retire early now that Maya was financially stable. Preston came in one final time. He brought his father, a distinguished man with kind eyes who hugged Grace like she was family. "Thank you for teaching my son what I couldn't," he said simply. Grace smiled, thinking about her journey, about languages learned and wisdom earned, about the power of standing in your truth with grace rather than anger. "We teach each other," she said. "That's how the world gets better, one conversation at a time." If you enjoyed this story, please remember to leave a comment with your thoughts about grace and second chances, and subscribe for more heartwarming stories. Thank you for taking this journey with us. Sometimes the most powerful language we can speak is simply honesty, wrapped in kindness.